Let's talk about divs. Divs are actually a very simple and yet somewhat complicated concept because all they represent is a box on the page. As we talked about before, all objects in HTML are either boxes or parts of content lines. That means they're either inline objects or they are block objects. Things that are block objects start on a new line, end on a new line. Things that are inline are in the line. When we started developing HTML, like way back in the day, we immediately started looking for ways to organize our content. And as this ability grew, we started abusing tables. I'll show you in the table lecture why that was. But we essentially used tables to lay out a grid of boxes and put our content into those boxes. But then we had a bunch of content that was text data or image data, but it wasn't really a table, but it was labeled as a table in our code. That's bad. The data scientists get very upset when you do things like that. So if we look at an HTML page, with our wireframing model, we would just draw it and say, there's a box with some content here, a box with some content here, and other boxes. We used to lay this out as a table. We'd say, okay, this is a table row, this is two table rows, these are table datas, and we could plan out our data. But once we got away from that, we still needed sometimes to be able to draw a box on the screen. And so we came up with the concept of div. These are the block objects that are equivalent to an inline span. A div means a box from here to here, and a span means in the line from here to here. So when we draw divs, what we're really just drawing is boxes on the screen. As HTML evolved, it turns out that we needed to label those divs. So we'd have a div and we'd draw a box up at the top, and we'd say, okay, this box is our banner box. It's got the banner in it. And this box down here is our content box. And this box is our column box, and so on and so forth. And we'd have div, 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 div. But it turns out most of us were drawing very similar wireframes. And most of us were using divs in the same way. So semantic HTML, instead of having div, 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 we label things with a box. Ooh, that's not the right one. We label things with a box that say what kind of a box they are. So we might say this box right here is our header. And this box right here is main. Pieces of main can be called articles or sections, instead of saying div, which doesn't really mean anything. If you look at a lot of old tutorials, it still says div, 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 div. But a div doesn't tell you anything about the content of that box. It's just a box. That being said, for complicated layouts and design purposes, sometimes what you need is just a box that doesn't have any meaning to it. It may not even have meaningful content. Sometimes you can put a box in the background just to give it a background image. You can put a box with a video in it and put that video in the background and have an animated background for your website, but it doesn't have any really semantic meaning. There's no content that has purpose. It's just a visual effect. And so it's still sometimes useful to use divs. And so here's what we do with divs. We draw boxes with divs. So if I set up a structure that says div, and I give it either using the properties window in code view, I can give it an ID and say this div is my main. I'll hit a space first. Main. And we have div ID main. Notice there's nothing up here being shown, because our main is just a conceptual box. It doesn't have any size. So if I give myself a define in page, it's going to go into a style in my head. And I'm going to say my selector is pound main to select my main div. And I'm going to give it a height. And I'm going to give it a height, and I'm going to say this is going to be 75% of my whole page. Its height is going to be 75% of my whole page. And then just so it actually shows up, I'm going to scroll down here and give us a background color. And we're going to do just kind of a light shade so we can see where our div is. Come back to our design view, and we see that we've got just a bar across the top. It is interpreting that as being 75% wide, but the height with no content is 75% of no content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to say V max. Let's do VH. And so now it is 75% of my view screen size, and it is now just this nice giant box that I can see everything in. I'll go back to my split code view, and I'm going to put some boxes inside my boxes. Automatically helpfully tried to add paragraphs, but I'm going to say div ID equals 1, div ID equals 2, div ID equals 3, div ID equals 4. And we've created a box that contains other boxes. So let's hit refresh. We can use our designer window. Let's go ahead and create some more CSS rules for 1, 2, if I can type 2, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to have each one of those a set height and width for demonstration purposes and a color. So I'm going to make one red, and then I'm going to easily come back over to my code, which is in my, which I said I was going to divide in my page, not in a separate, and say 1, 2, 3, and then give that a different color. And I'm only coming over here so I can use my little click box. Paste height and width down into 3. I'm keep zooming too far. And then in 3, see it in the design view, it gives you a dotted and shows you where these boxes are going to be as soon as I give them a height and a width. Just need to give a color for 3. Come down here to background color. And assign us some colors using our handy dandy drop down box. So now we've got 5 divs, one big div containing 4 little divs, and we've built the code that we will use in a more complicated and optional positioning video that will be posted later.